G'day, I'm Stuart McDonald, and I just wanted to do a friendly response to Matt Easton's recent videos, the two videos he did on Angelo's motions with his friend. I think those videos opened up a fantastic opportunity for dialogue and an insight into how different people can think about movement and motion, and how our understandings from today can inform how we interpret the writings from yesterday, or yestercentury, as the case may be. I'm the head of the Glenlachlan Estate College of Arms here in Melbourne, Australia, and I'm also an accredited exercise physiologist over here. I work with clinical populations and with high-performance sporting populations, helping them to test and improve their functional capacity, so how they move in space, helping people move better basically and enjoy living in their body. The other thing I do is I teach anatomy and physiology. And I just thought that if we want to move the conversation forward more, what we could do is think about anatomy in terms of the international standards for describing movement. And one of the things that I think was a strength in the videos by Matt was the way that the two of them brought out how a modern insight into movement and biomechanics can really augment our understanding of what these masters of the sword were trying to get across to us in their given times. Having said that, I also believe that we need an accurate understanding of what is believed today about the human body. And there were some inaccuracies in what was said in the video, and my hope is that this little response will help to clarify some of those things so that we can move forward in a way that is without doubt clear, concise, and easy to understand across the board. So the first thing to get into our brains is that anatomy is a science. It's the science of naming the parts of the body, and it's connected deeply with things like biomechanics. And in these terms, we have very precise meanings of the movements and the functions of the human body and all its bits. And one of the most important things that was brought out in the video was this concept of pronation and supination. Very important concept for fencing. It's a very important concept. The inaccuracy in the video, however, was that pronation seemed to be applied across the board to the whole body, and that's not a fact. The way we think of pronation anatomically is we think of it in terms of really only two body regions at a basic level. Two body regions. One is the foot, okay, but we're not interested in the foot today, though the foot is very important for when we're functioning, and pronation supination is important for how you transfer force out through your arm for sure, but that's not the thing I want to focus on. I want to focus on pronation supination in the upper limb. There's only one region of the upper limb that's concerned with pronation and supination, and that is from the elbow joint down to the hand, where the hand starts. Really, pronation only occurs around the forearm. There's only one place it occurs, it's around the forearm, two bones of the forearm. One is the ulna, which is the little finger side of the forearm. The other one is the radius, which is the thumb side. And we have two places where these bones articulate, where they join and move around each other. One is called the proximal radio-ulnar joint up here, just below the elbow joint. The other one is called the distal radio-ulnar joint down here. At the proximal radio-ulnar joint, it's one bone inside a sheath spinning, it's pivoting. It's called a pivot joint because it pivots like this. At the other end, it's one bone moving around the other, causing your hand to turn up or down. And so as these bones move around and within each other, we get supination, which they correctly talked about on the video. We remember supination because, well, I do, because that's how the waiter carries the soup, with the hand facing skyward. Pronation is with the palm facing down. Okay? I remember that because you lie prone on your face. So pronation, supination only occurs below the elbow joint. Notice that I say below the elbow joint because the elbow joint is separate to the joint that does this. The elbow joint is where the ulnar bone connects to and articulates with the humerus upper arm bone, and it is only a hinge joint. It only allows this hinging action here, up, down, hinging action. That action is called flexion. This action is called extension. Flexion is when a joint closes the angle, and extension is when a joint opens the angle. So from an anatomical perspective, when we talk about extension, we're talking about opening the joint out. And when we talk about flexion, we're talking about closing the joint. That's a separate joint, the elbow joint. It can only do this action. Pronation and supination, however, only occurs across the radio-ulnar joint. So that's the first important distinction. Now, here's where it gets funky. If I extend my arm out like this, with the palm pronated, but I supinate the hand like so, now the palm is supinated. What's happened there is I'm rotating through the forearm initially, and I can get to about here, what we call the neutral position. I can get to a neutral position halfway between full pronation and full supination. The neutral position, and then once I'm here, the forearm locks into place, right about here for me, and then the upper arm at the shoulder joint starts to rotate out. At this point, I'm getting external rotation through the shoulder. And if I rotate in like this, I go in further. You can see how my humerus is moving around. At the shoulder joint, I'm now internally rotating. So what's happening here is I'm getting two movements. Supination, pronation, external rotation, internal rotation. This is external rotation at the shoulder joint. This is internal rotation at the shoulder joint. Some people will call it lateral rotation and medial rotation. Rotation occurs along the long axis of a bone, or around the long axis of the bone. Okay, it occurs around the long axis of the bone, and it's dependent on whether the bone is moving away from the midline of the body or toward the midline. External rotation is away, internal rotation is toward. So pronation, supination only occurs here. Internal, external rotation only occurs here. Now in the video we're talking about squats and coming down like this and coming up like that, and how hard all of that is. The reason that that's hard doesn't have anything to do with pronation, supination, and I would argue it has very little to do with Thomas Meyer's theories on myofascial stuff. In fact, the theories presented in anatomy trains are not universally held by anatomists or neurologists around the world. There is a strong subset of the people who believe that that stuff is accurate, and there is a very strong subset who are at the forefront of their research fields in myofascia and neurology and stuff like that, pain research and all sorts of areas, who firmly oppose Meyer's concepts. Now, having said all of that, this idea of the body all moving together as a system, I agree wholeheartedly with. You cannot separate movement of your hand from movement of your foot, because we're a system. We're a complex adaptive system consistent of a bunch of other more simple systems communicating and exchanging information with each other. And what emerges out of that is our unique movement pattern, along with our unique personality and our unique everything, mind and self and consciousness. It's a complex topic, and it's a beautiful topic. For now, we're thinking about Angelo and his movement. We're thinking about a tensegrity. We're thinking about how the body moves and functions. The reasons for supination and pronation impacting a person's capacity to squat have little to do with myofascial trains that are the same across every human being, and they have far more to do with two other factors physiologically. The first one is whether your muscles are used to being, and your skin is used to being pulled in that direction. Because if it's not used to being pulled in that direction, we then have range of motion issues. And we know, for example, that the latissimus dorsi muscle attaches down here, right down near the bottom of the sacrum, all the way up into the humerus. I've got a video on my channel about this. You can look at the lats and its function for sword play. It's not comprehensive, but it is informative. And what we know is that the lats do this internal rotation. So if the lats are tight, which are running across all of the vertebrae of your back and pulling on your pelvis, if the lats are used to being in this position here, and then we try and do this where we externally rotate through our shoulder joint, what we discover is it can be very difficult to squat down. That's not a function of supination, pronation is is meant for squatting or not squatting, or going down or coming up or compressing or expanding, that's a function of your body's not used to doing it. That's all it is. And we can train that. I can train that into you. I can train that into anyone. I've had to train it into myself. I've had many clients where we've had to work the lats in order to improve their squat and stuff like that. It's huge. The latissimus dorsi muscle is a primary functional muscle of keeping the back nice and strong in heavy lifting for squats, and in restricting a person's capacity to get down into the squat without tucking their bum under, called the butt wink. People often target only hamstring muscles, but that's denying a systemic view of the body. So as far as Angelo's stuff goes, pronation supination only occurs across the forearm, okay, and at the foot. All the other actions are different. When we go down like this and bend the spine, that's called flexion. When we go back like this, that's called extension. Okay, the reason extension might be hard is often because your rectus abdominis muscles are quite tight, and the fascia that connects them all the way around here to the back of the lumbar spine. So we have to think in terms of all the musculature that is attaching to the body and why it's attaching there. Now, another point I wish to address, apart from the language, the anatomical language used and the biomechanics used in language, another point I wish to address briefly, and I apologise if I sound all over the place. I'm just reacting to this off the cuff, very busy schedule, and I really wanted to get this out there so that we can move the conversation forward. These two gentlemen have an inspirational attitude. I think they're very open and humble, and I love the fact that they're thinking broadly about interpreting the text and trying to bring it back to what they probably meant in the day. And hopefully I can add to that breadth of thought and perhaps add extra insight to that with our next thought. And that is that the way we read the text should be using what we would call in historical textual interpretation a plain reading of the text. What's a plain reading of the text tell us? A plain reading of the text tells us that Angelo is quite clear in his introductory material that these are to strengthen the back and to open the shoulders and lift the chest. That's a plain reading of the text. Another thing we need to understand is a plain reading of the text will help us to see that these particular exercises are designed to improve your capacity to fight with a sword. So let's have a look at the kind of fighting and the kind of techniques that Angelo is espousing in his text. So when we find him going into the lunge position like this, what's that all about? Well, let's just imagine for a moment that in this position down here, you need to withdraw your hand quickly to defend yourself or to move quickly out of the lunge. He's using, I would argue that he's using or promoting a strengthening of what's called the, well, it's part of the cross extensor reflex. It's what we would call the withdrawal reflex or the flexor response. You know, when you flinch and you all crouch up like this, if an attack comes toward you, it's a natural thing to flinch up like this. That's called the withdrawal response or the flexor response, because your flexors are all flexing your joints. It's quite natural, and unfortunately in swordplay people try and fight against it. I would argue that instead of fighting against it, we need to refine it. And perhaps what he's doing, without knowing it, is teaching someone to hold a deep and low position wherein they can withdraw quickly and then move into extension, bang, with explosion. I would also argue you need to look at the pictures. In the video there was mention of the hand being up and the hand being down, but when you look at the pictures that Angelo's drawn, not the stick figure ones but the actual ones of a soldier, what you find is that the hand is always the same orientation. The rear hand is the same orientation in space. It's always pointed the same way. It doesn't turn, pronate, supinate. Now, if you're doing something like page, you might have a different approach, you know, where we're thinking about not pronation, supination, but you certainly think about internal and external rotation and the physics of that. That's a different ball game. It's related, but it's different. With pronation and supination, there are certainly things that are easier to do. For example, if you pronate your hand, it's easy to supinate out this way, okay? For sure. But it's quicker and easier to extend your arm. So in the case of a sword fight, you're going to find that an extension of your elbow is going to elicit a synergistic response through the back, which will help you to open up into this kind of lunging position here, both hands up high. Why? Because the fibers of the triceps muscle are able to elicit an extension much quicker than the fibers and the muscles of flexion. So we need to learn to get into a flex position because naturally, neurologically and physiologically, it's much faster to extend than it is to flex. And that's to do with the location of the muscles, where they're attached, the moment arm of the muscles. There's a whole bunch of really cool things that have an impact on that. And so it's not about pronating and supinating at that point in time, I would argue. I would suggest that perhaps it's about the soldiers of old stumbling across the fact that on the battlefield and when they're sparring, the natural fast thing they do is an extension. It's just faster. So we now have to train a flexion. We have to train that response because it's not as natural. Now, I'm not saying unequivocally that's what's going on. I'm just saying maybe that's what's going on. But if you think about the muscular attachments and the amount of power they can exert and the joints that they're connecting to and the moment arms of the levers, then what you find is that an extension is much easier than a flexion, or is much quicker than a flexion. It's just, literally, it's just physics. And you can come up with all your theories and stuff, but you've got to look at the fundamentals first. There's a reason why we learn physics first when you do exercise science degrees. There's a reason why you look at the classes of levers, 1, 2, and 3 class levers, why you look at Newton's laws, and you look at gravity, and there's a reason why we look at all these things. We look at forces and vectors, and we draw a whole bunch of diagrams exploring what vectors are pulling what where and what the overall vector is. The reason for that is because physics is so fundamental to what we do. We must remember physics first. Then we pile onto that all the other stuff, which is basically physics anyway. It's just physics or chemistry at another level. And so there's a basic rundown of some of the stuff that might help explore Angelo a little bit differently. There's a whole bunch more I could say, and perhaps maybe I will create a more systematic video that's a little less kind of jumping all over the place in the future. Because Angelo's motions are fantastic. They're fantastic for posture, and he says that's what they're for. They're fantastic for opening the shoulders, for learning to pack them down. When we start doing our work like this, it's not about pronation and supination. In fact, I believe that is an erroneous reading of the text, because in the text he's very clear, he's explicit, that when you get up to here with the shoulders packed down, okay, I would assume the elbows will be as straight as they can. You then, the word he uses is force the elbows backward. You go back. So from here you force them back and around, with the shoulders continuing to be packed down. This fits with his stated and explicit goal that the exercises exist to open up the chest and to strengthen the shoulders and pack them down and increase your posture and basically make you look fantastic when you fight. Which is, let's face it, rule 3. Rule 1, when you fight, is to don't get hit. Rule 2, when you fight, is to hit your target. And rule 3 is to look damn good doing it. And that's what Angelo's all about, I believe, in the motions. He's about making you look damn good, because if you look damn good doing it, when you do it, then you're going to be fluid, you're going to be beautiful, and most important of all, you're going to be efficient. And that's what this stuff's all about, being the most efficient, beautiful fighter you can when you fight. Anyway, there are some random thoughts of mine on it. Matt, I hope you get a bit of a kick out of it. And I hope there's some food for thought for you, because you're doing great things on your channel and you're providing some great insights into stuff that a lot of us maybe wouldn't have. And if you can attach some of your thinking to a more accurate anatomical and biomechanical understanding, then I will be a very happy chappy, because it will only make what we're all doing so much better. And if anyone wants a more systematic kind of outworking of this stuff, if you want me to look at it a bit more systematically, I'm more than happy to spend some time thinking about it. But in the meantime, enjoy your studies and look damn good doing it.